Just staying alive was my goal back then. Foster is my name, Jamal Foster. Being 22, I'll tell you straight that life's been rough since quitting college 2 years ago. Wasn't failing or anything dramatic. Just couldn't see the point anymore. I studied communications, lived off financial aid and my mom's patience, too stubborn to admit I had no clue what I wanted. After fighting with her about rent and my future, I packed up and left. Ended up on my cousin's couch in a rough part of Tampa, Florida. The place sat above a corner store on 47th and Locust. Ugly yellow sign. Red open light always flickering but never off. It stayed open late, had hot chips and cheap beer, and felt like eyes were watching from every angle. It became my spot. First as a customer, then when money got tight, as my job. The owner, Mr. Patel, was this skinny old guy with hollow eyes and a face that never smiled. Didn't ask for a resume. Just saw me buying Gatorade one night, noticed my busted shoes and asked if I needed work. I nodded. That was it. Started next day, 3 to midnight 5 days weekly. No training, no uniform. Just don't let anyone steal, don't let fights happen, and only give change when the machine says so. Corner stores are like weird holy ground. You see the whole city walk through. Moms in pajamas, addicts strung out, kids spending EBT on tacos, and the same drunks every night like clockwork. Mostly harmless. Loud? Yeah. Messy? Always. But nothing scary. Until that night. That one night made me wonder if I ever really saw the people coming through those doors. It was a Friday in mid-September, hot even after dark. The AC had been broken 3 weeks straight, and the coolers kept pushing warm air, making the place feel like a sweaty locker room. I stood behind the counter scrolling my phone while my coworker, Alicia, stocked gum up front. Alicia was 25, quick-tempered, always smelling like vanilla. We didn't talk much, but she made me laugh when she trash-talked customers under her breath. "Yo, see this guy?" she muttered, nodding at the glass door. Outside stood a couple I'd seen many times before. Big guy, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, wearing a torn white tee and camo shorts. The woman with him was small, probably early 40s, always in fuzzy pajama pants like she just got out of bed. They never said much, just came in, bought beer, left. "They're back again?" I asked without looking up. "They just left an hour ago." Dude was slurring already. They walked in and headed straight to the back cooler with the cheap stuff. Milwaukee's Best, tall ice house cans, 40s of Colt 45. Should have been routine. But something felt off. She walked slower than usual. He seemed tense, fists clenching and unclenching like he was prepping for a fight. I glanced at Alicia. She gave me the same look I felt on my face. Watch them. Their arguments started as whispers. Muffled sharp words by the back wall. I tried focusing on restocking cigarettes but kept looking up when I heard bottles clinking. "You always do this shit," the woman suddenly barked, her voice cutting through the stale air. "Don't start with me," the man replied, voice low but shaky. "You was the one flirting." "With who?" she snapped, turning toward us. "He don't even talk." That caught me off guard. I turned, blinking. "Ma'am, mind your business," the man cut in, not looking at me. Alicia stepped beside me, arms crossed. "Y'all can argue outside. We not trying to have drama in here." They ignored her. Suddenly she pushed his chest. Not hard. Just enough to make a point. But something snapped in him. Without a word, he grabbed a .40 of steel reserve, turned, and swung it at her head. The glass didn't break. Just made a sick, wet thud. She dropped instantly like her strings got cut. Her head hit the tile. I froze. He hit her again. And again. Alicia screamed. "Hey, what the fuck?" I shouted, rushing from behind the counter. He looked up, eyes glazed, sweating, like he wasn't really there. She wasn't moving at all. Blood poured from near her ear, pooling on the floor. The bottle finally broke, sharp pieces still in his hand. The man dropped what was left, saw me running toward him, and ran out the emergency exit by the bathrooms. I didn't chase him. Couldn't stop staring at the blood. Her mouth hung open, eyes glassy. One hand twitched. Barely. Alicia had her phone out, calling 911, voice shaking. She's dying. She's bleeding out. Please hurry. Jesus. Paramedics took 19 minutes to show up. Police didn't arrive for 40. They weren't shocked at all. Barely glanced my way when I explained what went down. Name? The older officer asked, not even reaching for his notepad. Jamal Foster. You knew him? Well, they shopped here often, never caused problems before. He nodded slowly like he'd heard this story 100 times. That's Layla Davidson and Warren Phillips. Been trouble for years. Should have separated long ago. I wanted to scream at him. Her head just got smashed right in front of me, and you're treating this like it's nothing? But I stayed quiet. Just sat down behind the counter, feeling nothing, watching them wheel her away. 3 days later, Mr. Patel phoned while I was off. She died this morning, he said bluntly. Family removed life support. I had no response. What can you say to something like that? He surrendered himself last night, claimed he couldn't remember doing it. Doctor said his brain's basically mush from alcohol. I still said nothing. Take some time if you need, he added. But be back Monday. Can't run this place without you. I returned, not because I wanted to, but because I'd starve otherwise. The store felt different afterward. Every drunk customer, every shouting match made my heart race. That blood spot by the cooler needed 3 deep cleanings to remove, but the memory stayed. Sometimes I still see her when I'm closing alone at night. Lying there, hand barely moving, that sound when the bottle hit but didn't break. It wasn't some ghost story. Not the usual kind. It was actual, ugly, pointless violence. And it happened right there, between the snack cakes and the warm beer, where I still work. Never thought I'd end up afraid of the very place that gave me my first real chance at being an adult. I was 23 when Valley Mart first hired me, a local branch of some national convenience store chain. Nothing fancy, but steady work. After jumping between going nowhere jobs, steady felt like hitting the jackpot. I was always the one staying late, covering extra shifts, cleaning even when it wasn't my responsibility. 5 years later, I'd earned my spot as one of 2 managers, running nights like my own small empire. That kind of responsibility isn't given easily in a business that never closes. Between drunk college students, irritated commuters, and occasional shoplifting, you learn to size people up quick. You figure out who's decent and who to avoid. Thought I was pretty good at that, but nothing could have prepared me for Colin. At first, just another customer, middle-aged, maybe late 30s. Somewhat too skinny, with defined cheekbones and sunken eyes that seemed overly alert. I'd see him twice, maybe 3 times weekly. Usually after 11 p.m., when customer traffic slowed down. Never made trouble, never left a mess. Always bought identical items. Small cigarette pack, Monster energy drink, sometimes a protein bar. He wasn't noticeable until he started waiting for empty lines before approaching the counter. Initially, I figured he was being considerate. Then came the chit-chat. You always work this late. Ever get bored all alone here? Crazy weather tonight, right? Basic stuff. Nothing concerning. I answered politely, smiled back. Thought he was just a lonely guy. Honestly, many store customers are. You develop a tolerance for it. It wasn't until the 3rd week that his questions changed. Got a boyfriend? He asked with an odd smile like it was just kidding around. I laughed it off. Something like that, I replied, though it wasn't true. Seemed like the safest answer. He didn't press, at least not then. But I noticed his visits increased after that. Every shift I worked, he showed up. And each time he stayed slightly longer. Never purchased anything different, just leaned on the counter, asking questions that bordered between friendly and too personal. Live around here? Ever feel scared being alone so late? Someone should walk you out sometime. That last one really bothered me. I began spending more time in the back office. Told my assistant Andrea to handle the register when he came in. Colin didn't appreciate that. Avoiding me now? He said one night as I headed to the bathroom, catching me off guard in the hallway behind the counter. I gave a nervous laugh. Just busy. Weren't too busy last week, he replied, his voice tighter. That's when the uneasy feeling in my stomach finally took hold. That's when I realized I had a situation. I talked to Andrea about it, a tough 22-year-old covered in tattoos who didn't take any crap. She didn't hesitate. Want me to set him straight? She offered. Tell him to back off. I shook my head. Let's just watch him. Maybe he'll lose interest. He didn't. Next time he invited me out, he worded it differently. Ever grab a drink after your shift? Know a place nearby, just as friends. I declined. Smiled again, but more forced, less friendly. He stared at me for a long moment, then left without speaking. Andrea watched through the front windows as he crossed the parking lot. He's angry, she said. We hadn't seen the last of him, Andrea predicted. She was spot on. For a few days he just came in, bought his stuff, stared me down, and took off. Then suddenly, like someone flipped a switch, he acted normal again, making small talk, smiling, like nothing ever happened. The worst thing? Other customers never noticed. To them, he seemed quiet and respectful. For me, he'd become like a shadow I couldn't shake. A couple weeks later, Russell, my day manager, mentioned a weird talk he'd had. That guy Colin stopped by during daytime hours, said he doesn't come around at night anymore because you think you're better than him, he said with a half-chuckle. I looked hard at him. What exactly were his words? Russell just shrugged. Something about she thinks I'm beneath her. Said it with real bitterness. Honestly, gave me the creeps. After that, I started spotting him outside. Never close up, just far enough away to blend with the darkness. Sometimes at the edge of the lot. Once I saw him across the street by some bushes, barely visible in the streetlight. He just stood there, watching. One night I stayed until 1 a.m. before leaving. Figured he'd be gone by then. But stepping outside, I caught movement in the shadows. I ran back inside, locked up, and called police. They arrived quickly and took my statement. But Colin had vanished. Unless he threatens you or tries something, one cop said, there's not much we can do. He paused before adding, but we'll drive by during closing this week just to be safe. Those patrols helped. For a while, he disappeared again. I started sleeping better. Even convinced myself it was over. Until one Friday night, a month later, when I was closing alone. Andrea had called in sick. I was finishing the deposits and back when I noticed movement on the front security camera monitor. A man standing just beyond the overhead light's glow, still watching. I didn't hesitate. Called 911 right away. Same guy? The dispatcher asked. Yeah, Colin, I whispered. He's back. By the time police arrived, he'd disappeared. Again. 2 more weeks passed without seeing him. Then one night Andrea brought up an obituary she'd found. You won't believe this, she said, pulling it up on the office computer. It was Colin. He'd taken his own life the week before. No details given. Just a photo and vague wording. Passed unexpectedly. Private service. Survived by sister and mother. I couldn't speak for a while. Wasn't sure how to feel. Relieved, sad, guilty? He'd frightened me, sure, but he was still human. And clearly deeply troubled. In the months since, I've tried making sense of everything. Still don't have answers. I catch myself scanning the lot corners when locking up at night, expecting to see a shape that never appears. Sometimes I think about how things might have gone differently. If I'd been tougher, if I'd been gentler, if I'd said yes just once, maybe kept him from spiraling. But then I stopped myself. Because none of that was my job to fix. What happened wasn't my fault. And if you're reading this, maybe you've felt similar fear. Maybe someone crossed boundaries and left you questioning your gut feelings, your security, your own kindness. Listen to yourself. It's not conceited to recognize when attention turns dangerous. It's not paranoia to protect yourself. It's not mean to say no, even when it makes someone mad. I still work at Valley Mart. Still run the night shift. But now I carry pepper spray. Park closer to the doors. Walk out with keys ready and check mirrors twice before driving away. I learned fear doesn't always crash and loud and sudden. Sometimes it sneaks in disguised as politeness. Sometimes it smiles from the register. And sometimes it dies quietly, and leaves you wondering if it ever truly left at all. I always figured the store would be the safest place anywhere. Not because we had security cameras or alarms. Lord knows those barely worked half the time. But because it felt like home. Familiar. Unchanging. My dad, Thomas Perkins, bought Perkins Aeroset back in '98. A simple corner store on the edge of quiet Millfield. The kind of town where people still hold doors and ask about your family. He bought it after divorcing his first wife, and for a while, it was just him and the business. Then he bumped into my mom, Lisa, in the parking lot one gray January morning. She just moved back after losing her husband in a car wreck. They'd dated briefly in high school, and I guess something remained beneath the surface. By fall 2001, they were married, and my sister Emma arrived the following July. I showed up 2 years after that. Some kids grow up in daycare or at grandparents' houses. We were raised behind a dusty checkout counter, nestled in a makeshift playpen built from soda crates. We learned walking between aisles of chips and canned goods. There's this photo in one of our family albums. Me around 3 years old, standing behind the counter pretending to ring up a customer, wearing a cap that practically swallowed my little head. The guy I was checking out at the register was Mike. While Mike Simmons wasn't related by blood, he definitely counted as family to us. He'd been working at Perkins Aeroset since before my father took ownership of the place. Nobody understood the old cash register's weird habits better than him. After Dad bought the store, Mike showed him everything, from keeping track of stock without going crazy to which suppliers to steer clear of, plus how to calm down upset customers with just a friendly grin and a complimentary Slim Jim. Mike never missed a single Thanksgiving dinner or birthday barbecue at our house. He always showed up with something in hand, that famous peach cobbler of his, drowning in sweet syrup but made with complete devotion. Having no children of his own or surviving siblings, and with his parents long gone and his last romance fizzling somewhere around 2005, our family essentially became his. I can still hear that deep, gravelly laugh of his bouncing around our kitchen every Christmas Eve, the kind of chuckle that somehow made you believe everything would turn out fine. I used to tease him about being like the store's godfather, except instead of demanding respect through intimidation, he earned it through unwavering loyalty. That's why what happened hit us so hard to process. It was late March, chilly enough that you could see your breath hanging in the early morning air, but not quite cold enough to justify firing up the heating system again. That week had been particularly slow. The college kids were all gone on spring break, and most local families were either visiting relatives elsewhere or just staying cooped up inside their homes. Mike was handling the closing shift that Friday night, as usual. He enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere, claimed it gave him space to think and clean without interruptions. His routine never changed, locking up at midnight, double-checking everything, and switching off lights in his particular order. The man was all about his routines through and through. That particular night, though, something went terribly wrong. I didn't hear about it from police officers or news reports. My mom was the one who broke the news, shaking me awake just before 7 in the morning. Her eyes were already puffy and red, with a coffee mug trembling in her grip. "There was a robbery," she whispered. "At the store last night." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. "What? Who was there? Who was working?" Mom didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. The heavy silence told me everything I needed to know. The cops didn't reach out to us until later that morning. They'd already secured the crime scene and closed down the store, but they needed our surveillance recordings, especially everything between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. Dad, with his expressionless face and complete silence, couldn't bring himself to handle it. My sister Emma just locked herself in her bedroom. So I stepped up. God help me, I volunteered to do it. Walking into that back office felt like entering a crypt. I'd been in there hundreds of times before, but never with such a knot in my gut and a USB drive clutched in my hand. I dropped into the chair, turned on the monitor, and pulled up the video footage. The screen flickered to life. 11:37 p.m. There was Mike standing behind the counter, just like always, one hand resting on the surface, the other sorting through receipt slips. Relaxed, casual. At 11:39, the entrance door swung open. A skinny, fidgety guy walked in wearing dark jeans and a hoodie, his face completely visible, looking like he was barely holding himself together. My gut tightened as I watched them interact. No sound, just silent movements and gestures. Mike smiled initially, probably cracking some joke or asking how the guy's evening was going. The man leaned forward. Mike leaned back. Something changed in that moment. By 11:41, the stranger had pulled out a gun from his waistband. I felt my breath catch. Mike immediately raised his hands. You could clearly see the shock and sudden fear wash over him. He backed away from the register, opened the drawer, and started handing over the cash. It wasn't much, maybe $30 tops. That's when the guy lost it completely. He started screaming, mouth wide open, moving erratically like a kid throwing a fit. Mike said something back, his lips forming desperate words I struggled to make out. I rewound and played it again, slower this time. Oh God, please don't do this. You don't have to. Then there was a flash. 1 pop. 2 pops. 3 pops. 4 pops. Mike collapsed behind the counter. The man bolted for the door. The timestamp showed 11:44 p.m. I sat there, frozen. The cursor on screen kept blinking steadily, like my own heartbeat. The only sounds in that room were the quiet hum of the computer and the sharp tap of a single teardrop hitting the desk. I saved the footage, sealed the drive in an envelope, and locked it away in the drawer like it might poison the very air around it. Then I called the police to tell them it was ready for pickup. They sent Detective Layla Cruz, a woman with piercing eyes and an exhausted voice. She didn't say much when I handed her the envelope, just looked me straight in the eye and said, "He mattered, and this will help." A few days later, news spread that they'd identified the shooter. His name was Jason Mercer, 23 years old, living just 2 blocks from our store, with a record of meth possession and assault charges. Apparently, he bragged to somebody about lighting up some old dude over pocket change. That person tipped off the police. They hadn't caught him yet, but they were getting close. His face was plastered everywhere, on posters, all over Facebook, on every TV channel. And I hoped, God, how I hoped, that they'd catch him alive. Not because I wanted justice, but because I wanted him to experience what Mike felt in those final moments, trapped, helpless, and terrified. The memorial service took place at our community's central worship building. Practically every business in Millfield posted closed signs that day. Attendees packed the space completely. People took turns sharing anecdotes, some bringing laughter, others tears, many triggering both simultaneously. My father spoke last. "What I've lost isn't just someone who worked for me." His voice faltered momentarily. "I've lost a true brother." My sister placed his signature dessert atop the fresh earth afterward. The store reopened 7 days later. Folks came through our doors speaking softly, offering sympathetic words. Several broke down crying while making purchases. Though we'd repaired the physical damage, we installed his framed image beside our cash register. Each evening before locking up, we extinguished lights following his exact routine. Might seem unnecessary, but it preserves his presence somehow. Perhaps he remains with us through memories of someone who, despite no biological connection, embraced us as family. A person who offered everything and received bullets over mere dollar bills and desperate pleas. We sometimes catch echoes of your distinctive laughter near the stockroom, old friend. Your special light remains forever on. In such a compact town where fuel stations doubled as mini-markets selling dairy and tobacco products, where paper currency remained standard and homes stayed unlocked overnight, violent crime seemed unimaginable. But it happened anyway. My name's Vanessa. Only sharing this account because my niece assured me of anonymity protection. Currently middle-aged, I've deliberately maintained a low-profile existence. Yet occasionally, particular memories start pounding against your consciousness, demanding acknowledgement. This story partially belongs to me, though truthfully to several individuals. I simply outlived the others. Everything began during summer '87, in that empty stretch between two Illinois cities. Having just reached my 22nd birthday, I shared temporary housing with my closest friend Denise. We'd been inseparable since adolescence, two restless young women dreaming beyond endless agricultural landscapes. Neither possessed financial security nor clear direction. We barely survived through temporary employment, primarily manufacturing positions plus whatever unofficial opportunities materialized. During one particularly humid weekday evening, we entered a roadside convenience establishment along the county thoroughfare. The place clearly hadn't received updates since earlier decades, malfunctioning ceiling fixtures, merchandise collecting dust, noisy floorboards throughout. While selecting beverages and microwavable dinner options, Denise spotted employment recruitment material displayed near the entrance, weather damaged around edges. "Think they'd consider hiring me?" she wondered aloud. "You'd handle it better than I would," I responded with partial amusement. "I'd rather avoid constant exposure to preserved meat aromas and cleaning solution smells." By following evening, she'd secured the position. Classic Denise behavior: magnetic personality, entertaining conversation, universally appealing. She effortlessly remembered special occasions without reminders and possessed remarkable ability, making anyone feel uniquely significant. Working primarily evening shifts through closing, within mere weeks she recognized all regular patrons: transportation workers, factory employees, single parents. Returning home, she described customer interactions like television drama episodes. "That regular bought multiple canned meat products again. Clearly constitutes his entire diet." Or, "The elderly customer remains convinced we're concealing premium eggs somewhere." Occasionally coworkers gathered at our residence following shifts. We consumed budget alcohol, smoked outside, played loud music. I briefly dated one colleague, this reserved, tall merchandise manager. Nothing substantial developed, though separation occurred without complications. By midsummer, circumstances appeared improving. Then arrived that devastating evening, final July day. Denise concluded operations alongside assistant manager Kevin and recently employed Amber, barely adult age, still learning transaction equipment. They planned joining us afterward with inventory supervisor and another colleague named Tyler. I prepared early, arranging outdoor seating while cooling refreshments. Approaching 11, concerned telephone communication arrived. "Something's causing unusual delay. Typically business concludes 30 minutes earlier." Dismissing concerns. "Perhaps unexpected cleaning requirements. We'll personally investigate." Establishment located conveniently nearby, 15-minute walking distance or brief driving time. Operating weathered vehicle, immediately sensed abnormality upon arrival. Non-functioning signage. Partially disabled exterior lighting. Empty transaction area. Secured main entrance. Repeated knocking produced no response. Circling structure toward employee access, discovered partially open rear entrance. Immediate internal discomfort intensified. Called repeatedly with increasing volume. Silence continued. Entering space, encountered unnatural quietness except mechanical refrigeration sounds. Vacant service counter, absent conversation, missing background music typically played during closing procedures. Further exploration revealed exposed cash drawer completely emptied. Observed contaminated transparent surfaces. Dark liquid creating directional path towards storage areas. Then detected faint vocalization, pain sound. Weak. Struggling. Like someone trying to speak with their mouth full of pebbles. Following the noise led me to the refrigerated room, door slightly open. Inside, Kevin was sprawled against the wall, covered in blood. His shirt completely red. Amber lay motionless beside him. But Denise wasn't there. I screamed. What happened next is mostly a blur. I must have dialed emergency services. Remember police lights flashing. Someone pulling me away. Officers asking questions I couldn't answer. My hands trembled so badly they couldn't take my statement for hours. The police reconstructed what happened from the evidence. Just before closing, 2 men walked in. One tall guy with a bandana and a jagged chin scar. The other one shorter, heavier, keeping one hand in his jacket the whole time. As the staff prepared to lock up, these 2 hung around the beverage cooler. Denise politely asked them to finish up because they were closing. That's when they pulled out guns. The shorter one herded everyone into the walk-in cooler. The tall one turned off the open sign and locked the front door. According to Kevin, who somehow survived 4 gunshot wounds, they seemed calm at first, saying it was just a robbery. They wanted the safe opened, but only Kevin knew the code. For some reason nobody fully understands, Denise told them he wasn't there. Maybe panic took over. Maybe she thought they'd just grab the register money and leave. Maybe she was trying to protect him, but they didn't believe her. The shorter guy hit Amber with his gun when she tried to speak. That's when Denise told them there was about $30 in the register, begging them to take it and go. They ignored her pleas. The tall one left the cooler for a while. Nobody knows what he did, but when he returned, he was much angrier. Kevin said what happened next was complete chaos. Nobody spoke. The robbers shared a look, like they'd silently agreed on something, then started shooting. Denise took a bullet to the stomach. Amber was hit in the neck. Another coworker tried shielding them and got shot in the back. Kevin fell, pretending to be dead. The inventory guy never had time to react. 5 people total. 2 died immediately. 2 more within 30 minutes. Only Kevin survived. And Denise, my dear friend, was gone forever. They found her body in the alley behind the store hours later. They think she tried escaping when the shooting started. She almost made it out. Afterward, everything seemed unreal. News teams, police investigations. The town never viewed that store the same way. Wilson's shut down within 6 months. They never caught the tall shooter. The shorter one, identified as Eric Winters years later, was arrested for another armed robbery in Ohio. While in prison, he admitted involvement in the Wilsons' killings but wouldn't name his partner. Claimed the guy died years ago. Nobody believed him, but without evidence, the case went cold. Kevin disappeared from society. Last I heard in the late 90s, he was living under a different name in Colorado. He wrote me once. Said he dreams about it almost every night. In his dreams, he sees Denise standing between him and the gun flash, and wakes up before she hits the floor. I wish I could end this story with justice or closure. But reality rarely wraps up neatly. Sometimes evil walks into your local store for a drink, and walks out having taken 5 lives. Sometimes all you can do is share what happened, even as your hands shake typing it. I still miss her terribly. Denise was more than just a friend. She brought light to our dreary town, made life feel worth living. I'll always wonder what might have changed if I'd arrived sooner, if I'd somehow stopped them, if I'd simply been there. But I wasn't. All I can do now is remember her, share her story, and maybe encourage someone to lock their door earlier, look twice at strangers who linger too long, or remember that sometimes evil wears a friendly face and waits patiently for closing time. Never thought I'd quit a job by crawling out a back door bleeding into my sock. But life gives you stories you never asked to tell. Until last week, I worked at a convenience store in a rough neighborhood in Oakwood Hills, a small town outside Nashville where houses tilt slightly left and police show up too late. I never dreamed of working behind bulletproof glass, selling cheap alcohol and overpriced cigarettes to people avoiding eye contact. But 2 weeks ago, my father burst into my room at 6 a.m. like a drill sergeant, yanked my covers off, and said I needed to stop sleeping my life away. Pete was hiring and I was starting at 10. Pete was Dad's drinking buddy who ran Express Stop on the south side, wedged between an auto shop with junked cars out front and a rundown barber shop with a broken pole. I didn't know Pete well, but remembered he smelled like beef jerky and gas, and talked like every sentence was confidential. I had no choice in the matter. Dad had already told him I'd take the job. I'd been out of work for a few months after getting laid off from my warehouse position. It wasn't fancy work, but it paid consistently until the company relocated operations to Georgia. I tried food delivery for a while, but vehicle maintenance and fuel costs made it barely profitable. Despite what my father thought, I wasn't being lazy. I was just exhausted from constantly hustling for minimal returns. So with nothing better happening in my life, I showered, pulled on casual clothes and walked 15 minutes to the store, trying to avoid breathing deeply near the garbage containers behind the pawn shop. Pete was at the counter when I arrived, eating a banana one-handed while texting with the other. "You must be Daniel," he said. "Your dad mentioned you're pretty smart. You into drugs?" I stared blankly. "What? Drugs? Do you use them?" "No." "Good. Got enough issues around here already." That was my entire training. He tossed me a key, pointed toward a grimy stool behind the register, and gestured at a young woman arranging candy displays. "That's Tina. She'll show you the register basics. Don't let her boyfriend hang around too much. He makes customers uncomfortable." Tina was early 20s, talkative and constantly checking her phone. Her extended artificial nails clicked constantly as she spoke. "Just never hit void unless absolutely necessary," she instructed while chewing gum aggressively. "Pete goes crazy about that. Don't let anyone use the restroom. It's always out of order even when it's working." My career had begun. By shift's end, I knew I hated everything about it. We had a regular customer who always smelled like automotive fluids and forests, bought tall beer cans and cigars, and winked at me like we shared some insider knowledge. Then there was Letitia, who screamed at lottery tickets every time she lost, which was always. And the neighborhood children, constantly swarming in groups, pocketing candy when they thought nobody was watching. But the worst aspect wasn't even the customers. It was Tina's social circle. Every evening around 6, her friends would gather. Loud women with obvious hair extensions smoking cigarettes and shirtless men wearing gold chains and excessive cologne. They congregated outside the entrance, playing music from their vehicles loud enough to vibrate the lottery ticket display behind me. "Pete doesn't mind," Tina explained when I asked if they might tone it down. "As long as nobody's shooting, he ignores it. They're just enjoying themselves." "Enjoying themselves?" "They're trespassing and creating public disturbances." I started having dreams where the building shook to some horrible bass-heavy music while I stood frozen, unable to scream, watching everything vibrate until breaking point. A week into employment, I began hearing rumors. Apparently, Tina's intermittent boyfriend Marcus had gotten into conflict with a local drug dealer. A serious altercation. Word was he'd hospitalized someone's relative after stomping his face outside a liquor store. Now that person was using a wheelchair, and threats of retaliation were circulating. Pete knew. Everyone knew. But nobody took any action. "Are you scared?" Tina teased when I mentioned it. "I'm not interested in dying surrounded by expired dairy products and gambling advertisements," I responded. "You won't," she smiled. "They don't target women." She was mistaken. It happened Thursday evening, around 9:40. I'd stayed late restocking because Pete had an appointment, code for drinking at the nearby bar. Tina and friends were outside as usual, laughing and smoking while their music rattled the windows. I was placing beer in refrigeration when I heard it. Multiple gunshots. Very close. I dropped everything. Bottles shattered around my feet. Instinctively ducking, but events were already unfolding. Screaming. Front glass breaking. More gunfire. Shouting. Vehicles speeding away. I crawled toward the front counter to find Tina huddled underneath, covering her ears, makeup streaking down her face. Outside, 2 young women lay motionless in the parking area. One surrounded by spreading blood beneath her head. A man was writhing near the ice machine, clutching his leg and moaning. I remained frozen seemingly forever. My mind shut down. My body tingled strangely. I didn't realize I'd been injured until attempting to stand when my left leg gave way. Superficial wound on my knee, deeper injury on my shin. Blood soaking into my sock. Tina kept repeating the same phrase over and over. One victim, possibly named Jade, was still barely breathing. She grabbed a paramedic's hand upon their arrival and whispered, "Please don't let me die." She passed away anyway, right there on the cracked asphalt outside our store. Pete never called or visited me in hospital. When I finally reached him by phone, I asked about help with medical expenses. He laughed. "Absolutely not. You weren't even scheduled that shift." I disconnected. My father hasn't mentioned the incident. I suspect Pete will claim I quit voluntarily, that I abandoned him, that I couldn't handle the position. He can say whatever he wants. I'm finished with that place. No employment is worth risking my life over. Now I'm stuck in this hospital room, leg propped up, medication dulling the pain, thinking about how ridiculous the whole situation was. How minimum wage employment transformed into a combat zone. If they value that store so much, they can operate it themselves. Pete, Tina, Marcus, all of them. Let them party in that parking lot while waiting for the next shooting. As for me, I'd rather work in sewage maintenance than return to that dangerous place. Sometimes I still pass by that old store on my way to work. It's completely shuttered now, sign rusted away, front window broken. People discard trash in the entrance like it's an abandoned alleyway. But forgetting is impossible, no matter how much I wish I could. Not when that building represents the last known location of my brother. His name was Daniel. Growing up in Pine Creek, Illinois, a town so tiny it lacked its own supermarket until 2009, my brother was notably different. Not strange exactly, just uniquely intense and inquisitive compared to other children. He'd spend countless hours disassembling radios, rearranging internal components, somehow making them function again, but playing audio backward or faster or in multiple overlapping channels. Educators struggled with how to handle him. Nowadays, someone might have identified him as neurodivergent. Back then, they simply labeled him either gifted or difficult, depending on their patient's levels. Mom affectionately called him her little genius. Dad nicknamed him tech support, which always made Daniel smile. He never presented serious problems until university. Initially, he thrived studying physics at Northern Illinois University, forming friendships with similarly unconventional students. For 2 years, everything progressed smoothly. Then something fundamentally changed. The deterioration wasn't sudden. During his first campus disappearance, we attributed it to academic pressure. He returned looking thin, nervous and quiet, insisting he was fine. He wasn't. By his second disappearance, school administrators contacted us. Dad immediately flew there. What we discovered was devastating. Daniel had become paranoid, withdrawn, convinced people were communicating through walls. He avoided sleep, barely ate, claimed timepieces were deceiving him. That's when we finally received a diagnosis: paranoid schizophrenia. The news hit devastatingly hard. Mom attempted optimism, but I discovered her crying privately multiple times. Dad remained practical, arranging treatment programs and psychiatric care. Daniel moved home after withdrawing from school. That's when our extended struggle truly began. Medications proved ineffective, or would work temporarily before he'd discontinue them. He despised their side effects: mental slowness, grogginess, emotional disconnection. He resumed disappearing. Sleeping outdoors, frequenting dangerous areas, eventually using illicit substances. Claimed they reduced the noise. And temporarily, conditions appeared to improve. That's when he secured employment. A small convenience store operated 3 blocks from our home. Sunrise Mart. One of those all-hours establishments selling everything from alcohol to electronics. Not the cleanest place, but dependable. The proprietor, Mr. Kim, had known our family for years. Learning about Daniel's situation, he offered him night shift stocking work. Said he needed someone quiet who wouldn't mind unusual hours. Daniel thrived there. He established routine. He'd wake early evening, share dinner with us, take medications, then walk to work. His laughter returned. He even developed friendships, mostly with coworkers. They'd socialize during breaks, discussing comics and science fiction. It represented the first glimpses of his former self we'd seen in years. Briefly, we believed he was recovering. But life tends to disrupt equilibrium just when stability seems within reach. Mr. Kim retired. The store closed. Daniel handled this worse than anticipated, explaining the establishment provided necessary structure. Without it, previous patterns reemerged. He stopped medication compliance, resumed prolonged absences. But he always eventually returned home. Always. Until suddenly he didn't. We waited 3 days. Then 5. Eventually filed missing person reports. Police remained courteous but detached. Adults frequently disappear voluntarily, they explained. Without evidence suggesting criminal activity, our options are limited. When I mentioned his condition, they acknowledged but recorded nothing. Weeks passed, then months. We checked medical facilities, homeless shelters, questioned staff at service stations. I distributed flyers throughout the area. Nothing, not a single confirmed sighting. Eventually information stopped arriving. Mom stopped sleeping. She began chain smoking, discontinued church attendance, spent hours daily watching the driveway expectantly. When cancer appeared, it progressed rapidly. She claimed exhaustion prevented fighting it. 6 months later, she passed away. Suddenly, only Dad and I remained, salvaging what we could. We discontinued active searching. I believe we both silently decided that Daniel would return if he wished to. Perhaps he was living elsewhere under a different identity, building a new life. That possibility seemed preferable to alternatives, sustaining us until 2 years ago. A developer bought the Sunrise Mart property. They planned to transform it into a trendy vape and smoothie shop. They hired workers to gut the place. The discovery happened on a Wednesday. A crew member was removing damaged drywall in the back room when the ceiling collapsed. Under years of debris, broken tiles, insulation and rotted wood, they found a body. Police initially thought it was a homeless person. The body was decomposed, partially mummified from the dry conditions. But there were no signs of violence. No identification. Just bones and tattered clothes. But a silver ring with initials was still on his finger. I'd given Daniel that ring for his 18th birthday. DNA testing confirmed it was him. They said he'd been dead for years, probably since shortly after the store closed. They found old syringes and a pipe nearby. No trauma to the skull, no signs of struggle. The official cause? Overdose. Intentional or accidental? They couldn't determine. I sat in my car at the funeral home for almost an hour the day we buried him. I kept staring at his former workplace just blocks away. That store had given him stability and purpose. For those couple years, it was his lifeline. And when that connection broke, he fell apart completely. Dad didn't cry during the service. He just looked exhausted and empty. He placed a photo on Daniel's casket before they lowered it. The picture showed Daniel's first night working at Sunrise, smiling, holding inventory, wearing his name tag. Mom's name was already on the headstone next to his. We had anticipated this. Now every year on his birthday, I visit the store. I light a candle outside. I sit on the curb regardless of weather and talk to him like when we shared a bedroom as kids. I tell him what's changed: Dad working less, my promotion, our favorite team still losing. I laugh at my own bad jokes, and sometimes I almost hear him laughing too. This year I was alone since Dad was traveling. So I wrote this instead. Because people like Daniel, who struggle daily just to feel normal, who fall through the cracks not from weakness but because the system fails them, deserve to be remembered. He wasn't just a victim, he was my brother. He was brilliant, hilarious, and kind. Even when illness consumed him, something bright remained inside him. If you've read this far, thank you. Please remember Daniel beyond his tragic end. Remember the kid who fixed broken appliances with duct tape. The teenager who recited pi to hundreds of digits to impress girls. The man who, even at his worst, never stopped loving his family. If I can't continue this tradition next year, please share his story. Let him live in others' memories too. Let him be more than remains in a forgotten storeroom. Let him be seen. I never thought a quick trip for rolling papers would lead to someone getting beaten nearly to death outside our building, but that's exactly what happened the spring before graduation. Back then, I lived in a rundown apartment complex near Pine Ridge University in North Carolina. The kind of place with persistent mildew smell and unreliable heating. My neighbors were either students or people who'd given up trying. I didn't have a car, most residents didn't, including my roommate Daniel. We were two broke college students struggling with exams, empty bank accounts, and laundry machines that stole quarters. We were friendly with other tenants, sometimes hanging out in stairwells, sharing cigarettes and snacks, complaining about professors. Without transportation, the 24-hour Express Mart 3 blocks away became essential. I went almost daily for chips, caffeine, microwavable meals, and cheap household supplies. That spring, Monica invited her childhood friend Brittany to stay with us during break. Brittany was from Chattanooga, had a smoker's laugh, and spoke too loudly like she was used to winning arguments before they started. Initially I liked her confident personality and sharp humor that entertained until occasionally cutting too deep. By Saturday night, Brittany's final evening, we planned a small gathering. Nothing major, just friends, music, cheap beer and marijuana. Monica was visiting her boyfriend elsewhere, leaving Brittany and me to prepare. That afternoon, Brittany bought weed from Ryan, our third-floor neighbor. He wasn't really a dealer, just occasionally sold to residents. Quiet guy, broad-shouldered, always wore a denim jacket and kept to himself unless approached. While preparing to roll joints, I realized I needed papers. Brittany shrugged it off as no problem. Let's grab some beers while we're there, I suggested, mentioning Express Mart. She nodded, already taking my hoodie as if it belonged to her. It was nearly 10 p.m. The evening air had that early spring coldness that made your teeth chatter. We walked along the poorly illuminated pathway toward the store, passing quiet homes with flickering porch lights. Brittany was recounting a story about someone attempting to flirt with her at a service station in her hometown, laughing as she described telling him where to put his energy drink. She didn't notice the men gathered near our building's side. 3 individuals leaning against the brick wall, smoking and drinking from concealed bottles. I recognized their faces but not their names. They were regular fixtures after dark. They would occasionally make inappropriate comments, but typically the kind that balanced between offensive and foolish remarks you could ignore if you preferred avoiding confrontation. One spotted us and whistled. "Hey ladies, out past curfew?" I offered a strained smile and continued walking. I understood the protocol. Don't engage, don't escalate, just dismiss it with a laugh, keep moving forward and they'd lose interest. But Brittany didn't know this unwritten rule. She slowed her pace, partially turned and snapped. "Why don't you go pleasure yourselves?" My stomach instantly nodded. "What did you just say?" one called out. Brittany responded with an obscene gesture without looking back. I whispered urgently, "What are you doing?" "They're just losers. They won't do anything," she replied dismissively. "If you let men speak to you that way, they'll continue forever." She misunderstood the situation. These weren't college students intoxicated at campus parties. These were older men with harder edges. I'd witnessed one throwing bottles at passing vehicles before. We purchased our beer and rolling papers without incident, but my anxiety remained elevated. I constantly checked behind us during our return walk. The streets remained quiet, almost peaceful until we approached our building again. The 3 men were still there. As we crossed the parking area, one shouted, "Look who returned." Brittany called back, "Still hanging around? Guess unemployment truly is permanent." That triggered them. 2 immediately pushed away from the wall and started running toward us. One carried a bottle. I grabbed Brittany's wrist and ran. "Run!" I screamed. Brittany started laughing as though it were a joke. But glancing back, their expressions showed nothing playful, just pure rage transforming their faces into something animalistic. We barely reached our entrance. I struggled with the key, opened the door, slammed it shut, and secured the deadbolt. Brittany collapsed onto the sofa, catching her breath but smiling. Holy, that was kind of exciting. I stared at her incredulously. You found that exciting? They weren't actually going to harm us. I didn't respond. I simply walked to the kitchen, placed the beer in the refrigerator, and began trembling. I couldn't determine if it was adrenaline, fear, or anger causing this reaction, but something unpleasant and intense was building inside me. Then came the pounding. The door shook violently as if someone was beating it with both fists. Brittany froze. Open up, you F asterisk 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 INGB asterisk asterisk CH. I crouched beneath the window and peered through a gap in the blinds, all three men right outside our entrance. One held the bottle, another kicked the bottom panel, while the third paced with clenched fists. They followed us here, I whispered. Brittany's smugness disappeared. She pressed against the door and looked through the peephole. They might break it down. Call emergency services, now. She fumbled for her phone. The banging continued relentlessly, as did the shouting. I'm calling the police, she yelled through the door. They laughed. One spat on the wood, and then suddenly Ryan appeared. He must have been coming down from his apartment. Hey, what's happening here? He shouted. I wanted to warn him to flee, but it was too late. One man swung first. Ryan dodged, threw a punch, but couldn't handle all three. They attacked him simultaneously like predators. I watched horrified as they knocked him down and repeatedly kicked him. His head struck the pavement with a sickening sound. Brittany screamed and pounded our door from inside. Stop it! I called the police! They're coming now! The men paused. One shouted an obscenity at her, but then they hesitated. They looked at Ryan, then each other, then back at our door, spat, laughed, and ran away. I remained frozen until police lights reflected off the walls. Officers arrived quickly. Brittany opened the door sobbing and unexpectedly hugged one officer, who seemed uncertain how to respond. I rushed outside barefoot across broken concrete and knelt beside Ryan. A medical responder was already examining him with a flashlight. Will he recover? I asked shakily. The paramedic looked concerned. He has a pulse, but he'll need to fight. 2 weeks later, Ryan returned from medical care. His facial lacerations were healing, but he walked with difficulty and had trouble remembering certain things. Memory loss, doctors explained, resulting from his injuries. Monica and I invited him for dinner. Brittany had departed the morning after the hospital visit, crying while apologizing to Ryan, but he simply smiled, telling her not to worry. Recovery is harder if you harbor resentment, he said. That was typical of him: quiet strength, protective nature, even when unnecessary. After he left that evening, I sat by the window overlooking the parking area. The location of the incident still showed a dark stain from dried blood. Nobody had bothered cleaning it. And I thought to myself, all of this violence, all of this trauma, over something as trivial as rolling papers. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.